Welcome to Part 5 in the Advanced Projects Allocations by Progressus video series. In this video, we do a deeper dive into understanding and managing the Allocation Method Setup page. We cover setting up new methods and how the Allocation Processor uses these steps and fields to generate allocation transactions and GL postings. We also take a look at the settings and project setup, expense codes, cost types, project expense posting setup, and allocation dimensions. If you're wondering how Allocation Processor knows which transactions to mark up or skip and how they post, this is the video for you. We recommend viewing parts 1 through 4 in this video series prior to viewing part 5, as many of the core concepts we discuss here are covered in those videos. The purpose of this video is to discuss the allocation method setup. If I choose allocation methods, you'll see we have one allocation method set up. And the objective for this allocation method is to each transaction will cycle through all of the steps of an allocation method to evaluate if the calculation applies to that transaction or not. For instance, I have this first step set up to find labor that has been posted to a transaction, a project. How does it know which projects to calculate for? If I go back to my project card, you'll see I have this cost allocation method attached to the project. So that means it's eligible for being processed through the project's allocation, either through running the processor or having it automatically process when transactions are posted. In order for it to automatically process when transactions are posted, we can go to our project setup. You'll see here that it's a global setting to say yes. If we choose yes here, as soon as any transaction is posted to the project, the allocation processor will run and post the transaction. Reopen my allocation method setup. So the first step is to identify labor. So in this instance, we want to pull just transaction types that are resource. So this will include any transactions posted via a timesheet or through a time journal. I have the ability to assign a begin and end cost type. So this is the first filter to say it's looking only for resource transactions. The second filter would be within those resource transactions, I want to narrow the group of transactions that are pulled here, so we're only looking for labor to labor. Instances where we may want to exclude certain kinds of labor, we could have cost types set up such as labor-direct, labor-indirect, things like that. So if I wanted to do a full range of multiple labor accounts, I could choose a begin cost type through an end cost type. Maybe I wanted to bring it through some other cost type here. So that means you want to be aware of ranges if you do want to use those when you set up your cost types. Going to the next step, we're going to have fringe. So what this will do is it will take the labor that's been collected on level step 10 and then apply a fringe rate to it. The fringe rate is defined by the burden rates table setup, which was covered under another video. And then the third is it will take overhead and apply it to both the fringe and the labor. So you see here that the step is 10 through 20. So we'll use step 10 and 20, the results of that, to get overhead here. So if my labor is 1,000 on this first line, and then you apply a 40% fringe rate, we'll get $400 for this line. So then overhead would be applied to a $1,400 rate, a $1,400 basis. Here we probably could use resources again, since the first two are just resources as well. This is just to show you that we have the ability to either define one type or all types here. Going to the next level, now that we know our fringe rate, we want to apply G&A to only expenses. We don't want expenses plus all the other calculations that have happened for labor. So you see here we can apply calculate and hold. Again, we're going to find all items that have been posted to the project with cost types ODC through other, and expenses with cost types ODC through other, and then we'll apply 1 times the amount that it finds to hold that number, and then we will apply G&A to that. So you see this one is looking through steps 10 through 50 to apply the G&A rate. So a transaction, when it cycles through this example of an allocation, would only apply to several things. So if it was a resource transaction, to have a labor cost type, then we should get a calculation for step 10, 20, and 30. Step 40 and 50 would be skipped because these only apply to items and expenses, and my transaction type is labor resource, so would not apply to either of these. And then this last one should say all types, because we want to apply G&A to everything found above. So a resource transaction would be calculated for step 60 as well. Now let's say we had on the same project an expense that was a cost type of other. So that expense cost type other would be skipped here because it does not apply for resources at all. All types here would say, okay, expense should apply. However, because this is a subtotal and hold, these two lines did not pick up the expense, so this line would also be skipped. If it were expense of other here, this line would be skipped because this is only applicable to items, and it would be picked up for this last line, level 50. So if you had an expense line for other, the only calculation you would get for this method would be line level 50 and level 60, and we would get a posting for G&A would be the end result. Let's look to the right to see how the rest of the calculations. So once we identify the transactions throughout here, which ones apply, we're going to apply the steps here. Here's where we apply the rate. So again, if we find labor for line 1, then it would apply by the burden rate that it finds in the rate hierarchy. Then the end result would be it's going to post. And we know it's going to post because this column here says subtotal and post, subtotal and post, subtotal and post. So only the lines that post will have these posting rules to the right to apply. Now the question is, how will that new record that's been calculated be inserted into the project ledger entry? And in this instance, it will post to the source project. So these asterisks means just if it's on project IRV 001 for the source record, the new line created will also post IRV 001. If I wanted to, I could hard code a project in here. So that would post to that project and the same task as the original project. We do have the ability to have wildcards, so I could do this. So if I wanted to collect the labor on one project and then post a fringe to another, let's say I had IRV01 for my project ID. When this posts, it would pick up the IRV01 from the original project and then append FR to the end. So this would post to IRV01-FR. Most instances we will probably post to the source project as such. Now when it's posted, what expense code will it get? So this is going to post to an expense code called fringe. This will post to overhead. This will post to G&A. The cost type associated with it will also be as follows. So this was defaulted off of this code, but this could be changed if you wanted to have a different expense or cost type when it was inserted into Project Ledger. This column will indicate if there's the potential to either post directly to the project or post to the GL as well. So this expense payment type here will determine the type of postings you get. The expense payment type setup is here. So I set this expense payment type setup. So what this is saying is the expense posting is none. That means it will just post to the project. We could also use expense posting types that are posted to GL. So for instance, company paid GL. If this were used, then we would get both a project posting and a GL posting. To determine what the posting would be, you would have to then go back to my expense posting setup to determine what the posting is. So if it's fringe and company paid GL is the combination on the allocation method, then that means that we would get the following postings when it posted to GL. It would debit this expense account and a credit whatever offset account that we told it to post to. So we'll use this debit and this credit when the allocation method inserts it in a project ledger entry and generates the transaction to GL. We see some other key setups here. What type of dimensions do we want to be included when the transactions post? Since these are only posting a project, we only need the debit side of the dimension set up. If it were also posting to GL or identified or configured, when it posts just a project, it will always use the debit dimensions. If we're posting to GL as well, we need both debit and credit dimensions defined. You can only define dimensions for the posting lines. So both this is subtotal and post, all three of these lines. Let's go look at this line here as to how the dimensions were set up. You can go to Manage, GL Debit Dimensions, and you'll notice here that I chose Customer Group and Department. This all dimensions that are shortcut or global dimensions. Here we have the ability to choose 5 or 6 different options. Default means when the transaction is inserted into the project ledger entry, it would default all the dimensions from its normal configuration as if you type the transaction into the project ledger entry manually. Source would mean it does not use that logic. Instead, it would just use all the source dimensions from the transaction that creates the posting from. So in this instance, my labor transaction is my source, so it would pick up the dimensions from the labor transactions. Expense would pull it from the expense card, resource card, project card, and task card. These are the specific dimensions that will be used. If the original transaction had 5 dimensions here, so customer group, department, location, something else on the source record, when the project ledger entry is posted for the allocation, it will only have the dimensions defined in this setup. It will not include all the dimensions on the source. It will only define the ones that are included here. A couple other columns here, unit post. By default, we will post the new transaction. So the fringe line that's created will have a unit of 1. If you wanted to pick up the same number of units that the source ledger had, for instance, labor, then you would check this box. So if labor had 8 units and it inserted the fringe line would have 8 units as well. And we would force the unit cost and unit price accordingly. If I want to include non-chargeable lines in the allocation process, so if I have labor that's non-chargeable, it would be excluded on all these allocations because this box is not checked. And then the question is, when the fringe is inserted, do you want it to show as chargeable or not? The last column defines what rates that you use when applying. So if I go back to my rate hierarchy, this is my direct rate and this is my billing rate. So if the apply rate says billing only, then it would use this rate, but it would apply a 0 rate for direct and so forth. So this allows you to determine if you want both costs and prices on the transaction. If you want both, you choose both. If you just want the transaction inserted to have a cost, you would use direct usage. Or billing, you would just do billing. Thank you for your time in reviewing our video on the Allocations Method Setup page and Progressus Advanced Project Allocations. For more information on allocations, please be sure to view the other videos in the Allocations Training video series or the Allocations Help page noted here.